So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just wanted a quick reminder that this is being recorded and will be made available online, and that we will also make the chat available on our project website after the meeting. So I'm Eunice Kim. I'm the project manager for the Our Salem project and the long range planning manager for the city of Salem. And with me tonight are other staff members, so I would let them introduce themselves. Lisa, Austin, I don't know if Julie is here yet.
I'm Austin Ross, long-range planner with the City of Salem.
Lisa Anderson-Ogilvie, I'm the planning administrator for the City of Salem.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Hi, Patricia Farrell. I'm the Parks and Natural Resources Planning Manager.
And Julie Warnicki, I am the Transportation Planning Manager in Public Works.
Great. So welcome to our, I guess it's a second public forum on the proposed zoning map. We also met this afternoon at noon. We've typically been meeting on Wednesdays to talk about policies, but tonight's topic is proposed zoning map. So I'm going to start as I usually do, just giving kind of an overview of our Salem project and where we are. And then before we kind of dive into questions and answers, that's the real purpose of tonight, is to answer questions that you all have. We're going to go through a couple of the frequently asked questions that we've been hearing since we launched the interactive map a couple of weeks ago. And so we're just going to give some information. And then if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop it in the chat. And then we will address them after we do the frequently asked questions, if that's okay. So we're working on our Salem project. It's a multi-year project to update our comprehensive plan. That is the plan that has goals, policies, and a map that really guide how we grow and develop over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's the framework that really guides our development. It influences zoning, which we'll be talking about tonight, as well as everything from housing, economic development, transportation, parks and recreation, and all the other kind of topics we've been talking about during our other weekly meetings on Wednesdays. So as you're probably aware, we hit a major milestone in the project in March, where we put together a vision document that really highlighted the high-level goals and the proposed comprehensive plan map that we've developed through all of the outreach we've done in the last year and a half, 2 years in the visioning phase of this project. The goals are pretty big and broad. They cover, again, all those topics like housing, economic development, transportation, et cetera. And then the proposed comprehensive plan map is the framework within which we're going to be talking about zoning tonight. So we brought that vision to the council in March and we asked for their acceptance. It's not the same as a formal adoption. It wasn't a public hearing adoption process. We were really asking them, are we headed in the right direction? Is this the framework in terms of goals and a proposed map that we want to use as we start diving into the details of policies and zoning? So the council did accept the vision in March. And since then, we've been diving into all of those details. We've spent a lot of time talking about policies, and tonight we'll be talking about the zoning map. So just the first question that we're kind of answering is kind of how to use the interactive zoning map. And I will drop a link in the chat. So if you want to look at the zoning map as I talk, you can. It can be found on our project website, citysalem.net/oursalem. So the interactive map that we launched a couple of weeks ago allows you to enter an address or zoom in and look at what we're proposing for zoning across the city. There's some questions about kind of how do you find out more about a particular property and what the proposal is. So we just wanted to kind of quickly go through that. When you put in an address or you zoom into a property and you click on it, if there's a proposed change, that change will come up in like an info box. So this example here shows you that we're proposing a neighborhood hub on this property. You can scroll through and see what's the existing zoning, what's the proposal. And there's a click here for additional information. And if you click on that link, if it's an existing zone, so if it's a multifamily zone or a mixed use 1 or 2 zones that we're proposing for that property, that link will take you to the actual zoning language from our code. If it is a new zone that we're proposing, like the neighborhood hub, it will take you to a 2-page overview that we've put together that really talks about what we're thinking in terms of the uses that would be allowed, the development standards, etc. So you should be able to kind of find out more information by clicking that click here for additional information link. And then if you want to provide comment, there's two reasons we're having this map. The first reason is to show the city and the community, what the proposed zoning is across the community. But in addition to that, we are seeking input. So we want to hear from you. What do you think about the proposal? What changes would you make? And so there's a push pin that you can, it's that bright yellow kind of square with a red push pin. And if you click on that, you can drop that pin anywhere on the map. And then it comes up with a box that you can fill in. You can write in comments. You can propose a different zoning. And if you want to add your name and your zip code, you can, but it's not required. So it's kind of the basics of the map. If you have technical difficulties with the map, feel free to call me. I'm happy to walk people through it, or feel free to email me. My contact information will be on a later slide. So one of the major questions that we're getting are these proposed changes final? And the answer is no. We are doing this outreach on the map because we're trying to get the community's input, get your input on what we've proposed in terms of zoning across the community. And so none of these changes will be final until they go through an adoption process. The adoption process will be where we're taking a whole package of proposed zoning map, zoning code changes, the goals and policies, and an updated comprehensive plan. And we'll bring it all together as a package through the adoption process together. And we are hoping to start that adoption process by the end of the year. So there will be public hearings at the Planning Commission and then at the City Council level, where the community is invited to give testimony. And then ultimately the City Council will be asked to vote on that package of changes. One of the other questions we're getting is the city looking to buy these properties and develop them where we're proposing zone changes? And the answer is no. What we're looking to do is propose zone changes that reflect the vision that we've heard from the community and meet our needs in terms of future housing needs and future employment needs, as well as a lot of other priorities we've heard throughout the community, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. And in addition to that, if we're proposing a change on a property, it's not requiring the property owner to sell the land or to develop their property. They can keep the property as it is and maintain that use regardless of a zone change. So for example, if there's a property that's currently zoned single family and we're proposing multifamily, there's an existing single family home. That single family home can stay. No one is forcing that property owner to move or to develop their property into multifamily housing. It allows for the opportunity in the future for that type of development if the person who owns that property or someone sells it and wants to develop it in the future. So I think there's been just some confusion that it's different than a current planning land use application where there's a developer that's actually proposing the change because they have a development plan, which goes to this next question. Are developers proposing all of these changes? And the answer is no. The proposed zoning map is a reflection of the higher level proposed comprehensive plan map that we brought to the council in the vision document in March. And so this is the proposed comprehensive plan map really looked at things again at that high level. So is it mixed use? Is it commercial? Is it multifamily? And what we're doing now at the more detailed level of the zoning map, we're saying, well, if it's mixed use, should it be mixed use 1, 2, or proposed mixed use 3? If it's multifamily, should it be multifamily 1 or 2? Same with commercial. So it's a finer level of detail, but it all reflects the changes that we proposed at the vision document time in March. So we've got a lot of questions about taxes. If there's a proposed zone change on a property, will that property owner be seeing a big rise in their taxes? And we have talked to the assessors because we've been getting this question, and the answer is no. The zone change alone does not impact property values, doesn't trigger a reassessment. What the trigger is if a property is zoned for a new zone, and then basically the property owner takes advantage of a use in that zone that isn't currently allowed, that would be the trigger for a reassessment. So as an example, if there's a single family zone today and we're proposing multifamily, if someone then develops the property as multifamily and that use wasn't currently allowed in the single family zone, so the old zone, that would trigger the reassessment. So again, if it's commercial, say it's a residential zone and we're proposing a mixed use zone, and someone decides to redevelop the property according to a new use that's allowed in that mixed use zone, like a restaurant or retail, and it wasn't previously allowed in the residential zone, that would be a trigger. We've been asked to provide this in writing, and so I did ask Marion County assessors if they would do that, and they simply pointed me to the law. So it is state law. It's ORS 308.146. So another thing that's been causing some questions on the map has been the proposed rezoning of some of our existing parks. So our parks across the city, a lot of them are zoned PA, public amusement. That's really the zone that's meant for parks. But some of them are zoned single family residential RS. And so earlier in this process, I think it was last year, there was some concern that having these parks, even though they're city owned, if they have the zoning for a single family, that they could be developed into like a subdivision, for example. So we worked with our parks planners to go through the existing parkland that the city owns and rezone them, or propose to rezone them to public amusement. The intention is to show that we are intending to keep them as parks and not for other types of development. So multifamily, we've gotten a lot of questions about multifamily housing and why we're proposing so much multifamily land across the community. And the simple answer is that we know, based on our previous analysis in the housing needs analysis, that we have a projected deficit of land that can be developed as multifamily housing. That's not to say we don't have enough land to meet our housing needs generally. That study did show that we don't need to expand the urban growth boundary in 20 years. We have enough land, but it's not designated the right way to actually meet our housing needs. So in summary, really, we have a lot of single family land and not enough multifamily land. And so what we've heard from the community is that as we look at new land for multifamily housing, there's been a desire expressed throughout the visioning process that people want to see multifamily land distributed across the community and not concentrated in one neighborhood or another. And so that was one of the things that we tried to do as we looked at where we put multifamily housing as a proposal. Oh, I guess I moved on to the next question. Thanks, Austin. So that was one of the things we looked at. We also looked at vacant land because while we are trying to promote redevelopment, infill, reuse in our already developed areas along our transit corridors, for example, we know that that's not enough to meet our future needs for multifamily housing. And so we do need to look for vacant and partially vacant land to help meet our need. So a lot of our vacant land is in West and South Salem. And so you'll see that we're proposing multifamily in those areas, in addition to other areas as well. Another thing we looked at is trying to ensure that where we're proposing multifamily land, it's near things like shops, services, jobs, schools, transit, or mixed use areas. All of those properties that we're proposing for multifamily does not meet all of these things, right? So some might be close to jobs or schools, but maybe not next to transit. Some might be next to schools and transit, but not next to shops. And so to the extent that we could locate multifamily, propose multifamily land in areas that have amenities nearby, we did that. And in some of the areas, like I was talking about in West and South Salem, there's large areas with existing single family neighborhoods where there aren't necessarily mixed use areas or commercial areas where we're proposing multifamily. And in those instances, we are trying to pair together a proposal for a mixed use center near that multifamily housing so that there's the potential in the future for the new multifamily housing, if it's developed, to be near shops, jobs, and services. And in terms of transit, we don't control transit. We are coordinating very closely with Chariots, and they are going to be kicking off their own long-range plan for the transit system this year. So we'll be coordinating with them. They obviously want to know where we're proposing to have new jobs and new housing so they can look at their plans for long-term bus service. And so that will be an ongoing conversation and collaboration. So there are a few areas in the city where we're proposing to downzone land to single family. And I know this has caused questions, why would you propose downzoning when you need more multifamily land in the community? And one of the main reasons is because we have a zone called duplex residential that is very similar to the single family zone, but allows for duplexes. And state law, though, has changed recently, if you're familiar with House Bill 2001, and that is going to require us to allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters, which are small detached units around a green, like a common yard, in the single family areas. And specifically, we're going to have to require or allow duplexes on lots that would allow a single family home. So if right now in the single family zone, we allow a single family on a 4,000 square foot lot, the law is going to require us to allow a duplex on that same 4,000 square foot lot, which really eliminates the need for us to have a duplex residential zone. So we're proposing to eliminate that. In those areas where we're proposing to eliminate it, we are proposing to replace it with single family zones, which again, in the future, will allow different types of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. That is a separate project that we're working on. We're actually having a work session at the Planning Commission on June 1st on that House Bill 2001 implementation. So if you're really interested in that, in middle housing and what that looks like, please do come to that work session. There's a couple areas in the city that are currently single family neighborhoods, but they have a multifamily zone. So in the past, when the city has done projects similar to this and looked for land for multifamily housing, single family neighborhoods were rezoned to multifamily. And through our visioning process, we've heard concerns about displacement, specifically about the multifamily zones creating an incentive to buy a bunch of properties, take down all those homes, and develop multifamily. And so there's a few areas where we're proposing to downzone an area from multifamily to single family where that neighborhood is already developed as single family. So we've gotten some questions about the neighborhood hub, and this is an idea that really was born out of the whole visioning process, where we heard from a lot of folks that they want to be able to walk to a coffee shop, a barber, a bookstore in their neighborhood and not necessarily have to drive to Lancaster or Commercial or downtown. And so this idea is to allow small scale services and shops within existing residential areas. There would be, as we're proposing it, it would be a new zone. It would be a neighborhood hub zone that allows all the uses that are allowed in a single family zone, but would allow, in addition to that, small scale businesses. And what I mean by small scale is that we did a lot of outreach on the hub idea. And we heard from people that they want to make sure that those businesses kind of fit in terms of the scale and the height that exists already in the single family neighborhoods. And so there would be a height limit of like 35 feet, which is the same as a single family home. The size would be constrained. There would be some design standards, because another concern we had is people don't want to see strip malls in the middle of their neighborhoods. And so, for example, you couldn't develop a strip mall with parking in front. The zone would actually require your parking to be to the side or the rear of your building. So there are other development standards similar to that. In addition, neighborhood hubs is one of the strategies that we are looking at in terms of meeting our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. The city set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. And one of the ways to help do that is to help create some walkable areas, some more complete neighborhoods. And so initially we had proposed, I think maybe 10 or 11 neighborhood hubs in the fall. And we heard from the community that was not enough. And so we proposed, I think we tripled the number. So we have over 30 hubs proposed on the map, the interactive map that's online right now. Is that to say we have all the locations correct? Maybe not. And so I wonder, the next question is really about where are we proposing them? So this is just a picture of kind of what a neighborhood hub could potentially look like. It could be a home that's converted into a business and it looks like a home from the outside, or it could be a new building that again meets kind of the design standards, the development standards, kind of the box that we create when we create that new zone. And so, again, it'd be a walkable area where there's not a big parking lot in front. So a lot of people have asked kind of how did we propose the locations for neighborhood hubs? And we looked at a lot of things. One of the things we looked at is because we're trying to kind of create more of those complete neighborhoods where people can walk to a business or to a shop or a service, we looked at the distance that is between maybe a commercial corridor and the next closest commercial corridor. And we really looked at maybe a quarter mile, which is kind of a standard walking distance. It's about 3 blocks downtown. So to the extent that we could look at areas that otherwise are purely residential, we looked at, is there an area in that residential neighborhood that could be a hub? We also looked at street type, because when we did outreach on the hub idea, we heard that people didn't want them just in the middle of a local street, in the middle of the neighborhood. They wanted them at intersections, and they wanted them on busier streets, so collectors and arterials. And so we did try to site them at intersections of streets that were collectors or maybe minor arterials. We also looked at what are natural centers in neighborhoods. Is there a park, a school, or other destinations where people already gather, and this could complement that? And that's something we heard in our survey results and in our conversations in the community, that it makes sense to pair together a neighborhood hub with areas like schools, parks, etc. And then we looked at the infrastructure. Are there sidewalks, or could there be, or are there bike lanes? Is there an existing bus route nearby or along that collector or minor arterial? Or is it planned in the future? Is there a future bike route planned in this area? So we took a lot of things into consideration when citing them. And I said this afternoon, I wish there was like I just plugged it all in and it magically appeared and every hub was very clear and distinct. This is the exact right location, but that's just not the case. And so we're doing outreach right now to get input from neighborhoods, from residents, from community members to see, should these shift a little? Are these the right locations? So this is the time. Another question is, a lot of the areas that we're proposing neighborhood hubs have something already there developed. There's some that are vacant land, but some of them are existing single family homes. And the question is, do homes, are they required to then become a business? And the answer is no. The proposed neighborhood hub zone would allow all of the uses that are allowed in the single family zone, including a single family house, to be established, to remain, to continue as a permanent outright use. So even if it's vacant land and a property is proposed to be zoned neighborhood hub, it could be developed as a single family home. This is really just creating opportunity in the future if the market is there and the market demand is there to create businesses in locations that could help create more complete neighborhoods. So the proposed R4 zone is another new zone that would be similar to the single family zone, but would allow lived workspace on some of our major arterials. And so another thing we heard throughout our visioning process was that it's difficult to start a new business and to rent a space that maybe is expensive on Lancaster, for example. Is there a way to allow a little bit more flexibility in lived workspace than our current home occupations? So today in the single family zone, you can have a home occupation. You can have a small business, an office, a hair salon, but there's a cap on the size, so you can use about 25% of your house. We're proposing in the lived work units that you could use up to 50% of your house. So that's kind of the draft proposal now. It would also, in addition to supporting entrepreneurs, people working from home or looking to start a business from home, would potentially create more shops and services kind of on the edges of single family neighborhoods. Because again, the live work portion of the R4 zone would only be allowed on arterials. And these are some pictures that Austin took of what a live workspace could look like. So it's a single family home, maybe with a business on the first floor or the ground floor in front. where the person who lives there would run the business. So you wouldn't be able to rent out the space to a separate business. It would be like a home occupation in that the person who owns that property could run the business. Again, it wouldn't be required. It could be single family forever. So we did look at a lot of criteria in trying to cite where these would go. One of them was we did want to look at single family areas and again, major arterials. And we also looked at places where there's currently the compact development overlay. So this is an overlay that was formed years ago that allows more housing on smaller lots. So you could have a single family home on a 3,000 square foot lot. You could have a duplex and you could have a triplex. So it allows a little bit more housing than the traditional single family home. And because of House Bill 2001, the compact development overlay really is no longer necessary. And so we're proposing to eliminate that and replace it with the R4 zone. One of the things we're trying to do through this process is eliminate and streamline some of our overlay zones because we have heard from the community, from the council, from developers that we have too many. We're also looking at the orientation of existing homes along those arterials. So we were looking, are those homes facing the street? So if you were to have a business again on the ground floor, it would be accessible for people walking by, biking by, etc. And then we looked for bus routes and sidewalks. So a lot of our major arterials where we're looking to potentially allow this live workspace is on a bus route and there are existing sidewalks. Oh, so this goes back to kind of what we were talking about, the compact development overlay. Because it's no longer needed and we're proposing to get rid of it, we are proposing to have the R4 zone in other areas, not just major arterials, but other areas where today there's the compact development overlay. For example, in inner West Salem. So that whole area wouldn't now be allowed to do a live work unit because those are local streets, wouldn't be allowed, but it would allow for that housing, duplex, triplex, et cetera, that are going to be required by state law, House Bill 2001. And I think that's it. So now I'm going to take some time to go through the chat. Hopefully Lisa Austin can help as well. It looks like some people were asking for links and that was already provided, which is great. But I'm going to just take a moment and see what other questions there are. So did we give the link for the H&A and the vision and the comp plan, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, try to scroll up so I can see. Why would you change zoning if the owner has no intention to sell? Oops, can't see the rest of it. Okay. Hold on, let me scroll up. Why can't you just wait for a developer to buy the land and submit? I'm assuming that says, okay, submit a zone change. It seems like this is being forced on people that don't want it. And so this is different than a developer proposing to change a zone because they have a specific development proposal in mind. But we are required by state law to meet our future land needs for housing and for employment. So some of those changes that you're seeing are that we have to show we have the capacity within our urban growth boundary or our portion of the urban growth boundary to meet those needs by 2035. But there are other reasons to change the zoning. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to incentivize redevelopment, infill development along our core network. So Chariot's core network is kind of their network of frequent bus routes where they've committed to having bus service and to increasing bus service in the future. And so to the extent that we can tie together redevelopment and mixed use with bus service, we're hoping to help reach the city's greenhouse gas reductions goal, as an example. A lot of these other ideas just reflect priorities we've heard from the community throughout the visioning process. So the neighborhood hub idea is an idea that we heard from the community. And so that's why you're seeing that proposed. That's not to say that a developer in the future, if they found a property and they thought this would be a great area for a small scale business in a neighborhood hub, they could propose a zone change and go through the process, right? There'd be public hearings to change it to then allow a business. So we're not saying that we're precluding that from happening, but what we're looking for is kind of long-term, what is the vision for growth this is really our opportunity to manage the growth that is already coming to the community. You've all noticed a lot of development, whether it's commercial development, multifamily development, and this is our opportunity to say where we would like to see it. Let's see.
The next question is, how many acres do we need for multifamily and how many acres are proposed for multifamily?
Our proposed deficit, our projected deficit, I think, is 207 acres. We're proposing more than that right now. I don't have the number exactly off the top of my head. It's more than 200 though, that we're proposing to add, understanding that there may be opportunities or there may be reasons to pull some of that off, including all of this input we're hearing from the community. So we are, as the map is proposed today, we are projected to meet our need for multifamily housing. ORS section.
Yeah, I provided that in the link.
Okay.
A question about if the city can make the zone changes over the objections of the property owner.
Yes, this is a legislative process where ultimately the decision makers are the city council. So the city council can choose to rezone property across the city.
There's a question about multifamily housing on Brush College and the lack of sidewalks. So, you know, generally when a development is built, they build their portion of the sidewalk. Sometimes additionally, they'll build some portions off-site if it's warranted, depending on the size of the development. So sidewalk infill kind of happens slowly over time with development. Sometimes the city comes in and will redo an entire street through like a bond project, like we did in the last few decades when there was a city approved bond. We look for federal funding for projects, especially for streets, major streets that don't have sidewalks. So sometimes the city will build that, but a lot of the sidewalks are actually built by development. So if, for example, a multifamily development was to go in, you know, on a particular property and the street didn't have sidewalks, they would be required to build at least their portion of the sidewalks. Hopefully that helps. I answered the question about the House bill.
So
Suzanne has a,
on-street parking.
yeah, Suzanne has a question about.
Sure. So we're proposing the neighborhood hubs. Those businesses would be required to meet off-street parking requirements. So we're not proposing that the hubs not have any parking.
A question about if a property gets rezoned and then new folks move in next door. I'm not sure what the question is asking about. If you have to go by a bunch of rules, maybe Gail, if you want to clarify that, we try to answer that for you. Suzanne's asking about building standards, higher building standards for the type of home businesses that you showed in the pictures on the slide.
Yeah, we're working with building and safety right now. There is building code specific for live works units. There are size restrictions and there's number of employee restrictions. And so we're going to align obviously with that. And so there are different standards and we're fleshing that all out right now. So stay tuned. But yes, there are different standards for live work.
There's a question about the transportation planning rule and how that will be addressed in this project with no third bridge.
Julie?
Okay, so yes, we will be and have been looking at the transportation planning rule. This is a little bit different than a developer proposed, quasi-judicial change where we're looking at the overall system. So that, sort of the whole network and comparing that to the traffic that would exist under the existing zoning. And so in particularly thinking about West Salem, there's a lot of existing single family zoning. And that the development of that is going to already lead to a lot failure of a lot of the traffic system. And so we're trying to address that by making more of a mix of uses so that while there may be some more trips in a certain area, there are more opportunities for people to go to closer destinations, for example, to have their needs met. And so overall, we've run the traffic model, and in general, we're not making things any worse than they would be under existing zoning. And so that is the approach to meeting the transportation plan. Recognize that unfortunately we don't have, well, fortunately or unfortunately, the Wallace Road in particular, is basically already at capacity. And how to address that is something that we will continue to work with the state on. But these zoning changes are not creating those problems. So that's, Eunice, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was a great summary.
And I think that kind of addressed the next question, which was increase in traffic and how that's related to greenhouse gases.
There's a comment from Suzanne about incentivizing redevelopment along arterials means you want people to move who live there now out of the way for apartments and businesses. It's contrary to a vision. Long Market was proposed. There was an agreement with the city not to do that. So we're going back on the promise. I'm not familiar with that promise. But if you're talking about the area along Market Street that's currently single family, we intentionally are not proposing mixed use in that area because we're not trying to incentivize tear downs and redevelopment. We're proposing the R4 zone in that area. So again, if people want to live and work out of their house, they can. In other areas along Market Street, we did a neighborhood plan with Nesca and Lansing a couple of years ago, and they would like to see more mixed use along Market Street. And so one of the other inputs that we considered was those recent neighborhood plans where neighborhoods spent a lot of time looking at things like Market Street. So I'm not familiar with that agreement or what portion of Market we agreed not to change. But hopefully that answers your question, Suzanne.
There's a question about redevelopment of R4 property and if it will result in homes being demolished and then rebuilt with a more retail-centric design, which would alter the look of the neighborhood.
How do you keep homes from being demolished? I
think, I was just going to say, I think, but it's always going to be cheaper to use the house for the business, which is how it's proposed. It's still a zone where you would have to live there, right, Eunice? But I think maybe Judith's question is about the aesthetic. They want it to look less housey and more like a business. I think that might be the question.
And so is the suggestion to have design standards on the house? So we don't have any design standards today for single family homes. But maybe the suggestion is that we do so that even if there's a business, it could still look like a house. Maybe that's what I'm getting out of that comment. I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, feel free to post again, Judith, if that's not what you meant. Overhead power lines, it doesn't affect the type of buildings. Usually if a building is too tall and there's like overhead power lines, they have to work with the utility company to move them somewhere that can still serve the businesses. So generally just a development concern that happens at the time of development.
There's a thank you. What is the plan for additional schools for increased population? So we have been coordinating with the schools district from early on in the visioning process. And we have also presented, when we got to the vision document, this is the proposal for the changes to the proposed comprehensive plan map. And we did ask them specifically what impact that would have on their future school needs. And the answer is it wouldn't impact their need for additional schools. There's already a need projected for a middle school based on kind of a structural imbalance they have with all the feeder systems and where the schools are located. And but they did tell us that our proposed changes to the map is not impacting that. That's a structural issue that they have in the system today and with the growing population generally. They did ask us and did say that they would prefer that multifamily housing was distributed across the community and not concentrated just in Northeast Salem, given the capacity concerns in that area. Market Street from Evergreen to Broadway.
So that's the compact development area today that's being rezoned, potentially rezoned to R4.
And that again was we did that because we have heard the same concern, Suzanne, that you are expressing, that if we were to rezone it to mixed use, then it would incentivize people to tear down those homes and redevelop them into other buildings. And so the proposal is to allow for that same kind of compact development through the R4 zone and middle housing, but also allow people to have live work space if they so choose. Okay.
I'm going to drop a link to the map again. Somebody was asking about the map that we're referencing, so I'll just drop that in there again in case you didn't see it.
I'm scrolling too fast. Okay.
So there's a question about if there's a developer interested in the Fawn Street property in Northwest.
So I have not heard from that developer. Have you? No, I haven't. We haven't heard from a developer on that property. So it has not been decided.
Yeah, nothing on the map that's been shown has been decided. So hopefully people got that from Eunice's presentation. It's all, what's the purpose of doing outreach? There's still, months of analysis and comments and considerations to be made. And then it will go through public hearing processes, like Eunice said, at the Planning Commission and ultimately at the City Council. So no one property on the map has already been decided. So please continue to provide your comments and questions.
So I just wanted to chime in on, I saw a follow-up from somebody regarding the significant effect on traffic. And so, like I was saying, we did run a preliminary analysis of the changes that were being proposed in the regional traffic model to see if there were any areas where we were making it, the changes would make the traffic significantly worse or lead it to failure where it was not otherwise failing. And there really were very few locations that reached that threshold. However, as Lisa and Eunice have said, this is still a draft. And so, once there's going to be some shifting that happens. And so we're going to need to look at that again and make sure that that situation is still the case. And if there are areas where we are making it either causing a traffic area to fail or creating it to fail significantly worse than it would otherwise, then there's a few options, including identifying a transportation infrastructure project that could address that change to mitigate it, and adding that into the transportation system plan. Alternatively, as a community, this council could decide to accept a higher level of congestion at certain areas, and that's a city council decision through the transportation system plan. Obviously, if it's a state facility, we have to coordinate with the state and what they call an alternate mobility target. So there's a number of different steps that could be taken. And one of them could be that maybe, we run it through and say, maybe there is some change that we have to dial back on in order to make those findings.
Thanks, Julie. Looks like you answered the question. There's a question about a bridge. I'm gonna take that too, Julie.
I didn't actually see the question yet.
Oh, it's just that there needs to be another bridge. Maybe it's more of a comment. There needs to be another bridge before West Salem becomes gridlock.
There's a related question about impact on access to emergency services caused by limited West Salem infrastructure.
So, at this point in time, the transportation system plan still calls for, another bridge in the future. However, the project that was moving forward has stopped. So another effort would have to begin. People are allowed to develop their land. and regardless of whether or not there's another bridge. And the city, I believe, well, the city makes efforts to, work to make sure that we can provide services where needed. So, the fire station in West Salem, or locating different facilities in West Salem to try to help with that issue. I don't know.
So there's another question, thanks Julie, about, dispersing multifamilies again throughout Salem. So we have done an analysis to look at kind of the different areas of Salem and how much multifamily land there is and how it's proposing to add. And so we're looking at kind of what the net will be. So we are doing that analysis to show, because we are getting that question, I think certain neighborhoods feel like perhaps they're getting more multifamily housing, or maybe there's too much already in a certain neighborhood, et cetera. So as we've gotten those questions, we are doing that analysis to show that we're dispersing it across the community. And when that's all done, we will put that online.
So Judith followed up to clarify her comment that the concern is that the homes would be redesigned or built to meet the needs of the service or retail portion and look less like homes within the neighborhood. Yeah, I think that's a good comment. I think that's
valid.
Valid. Definitely something we'll think about.
Yeah.
Let me scroll up. Thank you, Suzanne, for putting information about the land use network in the chat. That was really nice of you. There's a question about Mildred Street having no parking. How can a business operate along this street?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions about Mildred and concerns about allowing live work space along that street. Initially, when we looked at that street, again, it's a major arterial with single family homes facing that street, and there are bike lanes and sidewalks and a bus route. So the idea was, could people get to a business there without having to drive, for example? But we're going to take a second look as we're getting questions, a lot of comments on that area, in that area. What was the question? I feel like I was just talking about Mildred.
Yeah, no on-street parking. So also, I think though, there's no expectation that every single one of those houses will all of a sudden open a business, right? Think about how many people in Salem, they own their house. Any of them that own a business? Maybe one, maybe a lot. But each person that would potentially live in an R4 zone, they may not run a business, or if they do, they would need to decide, is this the right property for me and the type of business I'm going to run? Lots of people already run home occupations. They're allowed anywhere in Salem under certain limitations, but on any particular, any lot in Salem for a single family house can have a home occupation. There's just the limitations on the size and the type of business. So it could be something as small as like, I'm going to do hair and I'll have one client at a time and they'll park in my driveway, right? So it's not necessarily this like full scale business. It could be nothing. None of these could convert. It could be something, small scale that would make sense in a house. So I guess that's what we were thinking, trying to expand the home occupations a little bit more than what people can already do.
And we have heard concerns just about speeding in that area. And so generally, so that I've asked folks who had that concern, they can send that to me, because I think there's a request to just see how fast are people actually going. I think there's a whole program where people can request kind of speed radars. Is that what it's called? So in any case, I digress.
Right. So we will send that to the appropriate staff. Gail followed up about, maybe, I know Gail was in the first meeting this afternoon, and maybe that she thought I was saying that they don't get a say. And so I just want to clarify, somebody had asked in the meeting earlier today how to vote. How can they vote on this project? And so I had said, well, it's not a project to vote on, but we are taking input. So I hope it didn't come across as you can't provide input. You definitely can. I think Eunice went through some of the ways, and then ultimately at public hearings before the Planning Commission and the council, but the only folks that get a vote really are the city council at the end of the day. So that's the point I was trying to make. So hopefully that clarifies that, Gail. And
so there's a question about, do we know the number of people or percentage of people who use mass transit? I don't know offhand. I think it's probably been significantly impacted by COVID. Julie, do you know?
Well, I don't know the statistic on the top of my head, but the only data that we have really access to is the census data in terms of journey to work, and how people say that they get to work. There's also data that gets collected through household travel surveys that are done about every 10 years through the Council of Governments. And it's a pretty low percent in terms of journey to work. I probably shouldn't say because I will get it wrong, but it's significantly less than 5%. Okay. And that, of course, is only the journey to work trip, not other trips. Transit Chariots has a lot more data, and they are expanding their ability to get data with new collection systems for automatic payment encounters and things like that on buses. So that helps answer that question.
Great.
There's a question about if you can have a 2-story fourplex and have one of the units be a building. I don't know if your question, Suzanne, is through the House bill or if you mean in the R4 zone, but an entire unit could not be a business. Correct,
Yes.
Eunice?
Yes, as we're proposing the R4 zone, there can only be one live work unit on a lot. That live work unit would have to be on the ground floor. So we don't anticipate that if there's 4 units, all 4 could have a business. We understand the impact of that could be greater than what the proposal is.
And then also your entire unit couldn't be the business. It's limited.
We would only allow up
Proposed to be limited.
50%, right, of a unit to actually be the non-residential space.
Let's see. Someone has a question about developing residential or residential agriculture zoning. Yes. The person on Galaxy S9. Oh, you want to talk? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm at my son's Little League game, having trouble writing things up. First off, thanks guys for having this. I really appreciate it. I haven't had time to do a lot of research, just talking with my neighbors, and you've explained a lot, and it's obviously a much bigger project than I think a lot of my neighbors are focused on. But something I'm curious about, the little bit of research I did, it sounds like residential agriculture, or the West Salem neighborhood plans that call it like a developing residential, is intended to allow for both multifamily or single family, kind of, as the property lays out and what the property owner wants to develop, and you analyze it at that time. So maybe I'm incorrect and you can correct me, but if that is the case, why would we want to make these decisions now without really having on ground look at what these properties are really capable for, and what the facilities could handle? Thank you again. I'll jump off.
So I think the question had to do, so developing residential is the comp plan designation. So that's that higher level map that I was talking about. Residential agriculture RA is the zoning map that implements that. And it's really meant, the developing residential is really meant as a holding zone. So as the city develops, that would change. I should just step back and say, all of the land within our urban growth boundary is meant to eventually be urbanized and be developed. The residential agriculture RA zone does not allow for multifamily housing today. And so I'm not sure if the question was, if we allow both multifamily and single family, why wouldn't we just hold off on the change? But that zone does not allow for multifamily housing. Did I get that right in terms of the question?
Well, yes, but I mean, really anything that developed in the residential agricultural would have to go through a zone change, correct?
If we aren't proposing a change there in the future?
Well, yeah, somebody's eventually going, like you say, everything's going to be urbanized. Someone's going to make a change eventually. But you guys are dictating what that change can be with these decisions, maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the road. So I'm just curious why we wouldn't leave it under that developing residential, and then maybe incentivize people to push for more multifamily, but not make a decision so far in advance where there's a lot of the facilities aren't even there to build these yet.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is that almost all of the land that's zoned RA is developed without a zone change. It's developed into single family subdivisions. So that is a use that is permitted. And so almost every single family subdivision in Salem was RA until it was subdivided for a single family. That's kind of how it works. So if we want to prevent the land from only being single family in the future, and we want to meet our need for multifamily, we have to go through and pick that land now, because when somebody comes in with their proposal for a subdivision, it's already too late because it'll be a permitted use. And we can't then say, oh, no, we wanted apartments here, because people have a right to develop their land under their zoning as it exists the time that they come in for a development. So we have to pick the land now that we need to hold for multifamily, or else it will just be developed as single family. We'll have lost our opportunity. And the reason we need that land is because we know that we have a need for multifamily, housing affordability, et cetera, the other things that Eunice has been talking about. So it could be, though, as often the case, land is zoned for something and not developed that way for 10, 20, 30 years. Like you said, it might be an area where the services aren't there yet. And a lot of times services kind of tumble along. So one development brings the water sewer a little bit further, paves the street, puts in the sidewalks, and then it's cheaper for the next person and the next person because they're not bringing those services from as far as they would have had to. So some of that happens slowly. Some of it happens kind of pretty quickly in certain areas once the development starts going. So we can't predict that future. And especially if people own property and don't have a desire to sell it or develop it. And that's okay, because in any of these zone changes, anybody can keep using the property for as long as they want in the way that they're using it today. So there's no requirement that they sell it to a developer, become a developer, or build apartments or anything like that. So hopefully that answers that question. Eunice? No?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think it's a good reminder that this project really came. The reason we're doing the project is because the community asked for a vision, asked to have a say in how we develop in the future. So this project goes back to 2017 when the city first did a strategic plan that asked the community, what are your priorities for the city, for city services, kind of what are your concerns? And what we heard as a city was that there's a lot of development happening. What is the vision for that growth? And so, internally, like the planning division, we have wanted to update the comprehensive plan because it has not been updated holistically in line with any sort of vision for decades. And so the way development has happened is that, a developer proposes something in this location or in this location, and it isn't like a big picture look at how we want the community to grow and really have that chance to proactively say, this is where we would like to see a mix of uses. This is where we would like to see commercial, industrial, et cetera. And so this project came out of that strategic plan. And then the city council funded this project back, I think in 2017, 2018. So it really did come from a desire from the community to have a handle on all the growth and development that's happening and have a proactive say so that we could know long-term, in 10, 20, 30 years, it may take that long to see some of this development happen, but the community said, this is where we want to see this type of development. Hopefully that provides some background.
Let's see, Mickey asked about what zones allow short-term commercial lodging in West Salem. So that's allowed in the single family zone. It's allowed in the mixed use zones. It's allowed in the commercial zones. It's just not, correct me if I'm wrong, Eunice, it's not allowed in multifamily zones.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's not allowed in apartments. We wanted to make sure that we weren't impacting, our housing by turning apartments into kind of Airbnbs instead of long-term residential uses.
Find a link to the page and put that in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
So there's some questions, Eunice, about building housing in West Salem if it's not on a bus route and how that would impact the GHG.
Adding multifamily, right. So yes, and maybe I apologize if I wasn't clear. So there are some areas where we're proposing multifamily that isn't on a bus route. And in those areas, we are trying to propose mixed use nearby so that there could be some shops and services and jobs that people could get to from that multifamily housing or those single family neighborhoods around it without having to drive. Everyone doesn't need to drive to downtown or drive down Wallace. And then what Julie was saying, it takes kind of the future planning for where people will live for transit to then to make their plans for what they'll serve. And this question came up earlier this afternoon about kind of, could Chariots look at other types of transit? So not just your kind of typical bus. And I know they are thinking about that, kind of smaller micro mobility kind of future types of transit service, not just kind of, again, the typical bus. And so maybe that's a possibility. And so those conversations are ongoing, our coordination with Chariots. Can someone drop a link to what is allowed in the multifamily 2 zone?
Just drop the link to the zone.
Okay, thanks.
I turn off my camera so I can hunt around and find it. Let's see. So it sounds like there's some concern from folks that their property is proposed to be rezoned, and that either that's taking their property or going to force them maybe to do something with their property that they don't want to do. So do you want to address that again, Eunice?
So if there's proposed zone change on your property, you aren't going to be required to develop it, to change the use, to sell it. I'm not sure if that answers the question. So, I'm not sure if I answered this or said this clearly. We're looking at land. So a lot of these questions are around multifamily. So we're looking for vacant land for multifamily, in addition to partially vacant land as well. So land that maybe has the potential in the future to add housing. That doesn't mean that some of these properties couldn't be split, for example. But the idea is that we're looking for land that is available. So the state calls it buildable, like what is buildable in the future?
Yeah, and so I think this is to Sherry's question, saying some of these properties already are developed with homes. So I think when we look at them, and under the state definition, we call them partially vacant because they're large lots and they only have one house. And we see a lot of land redevelop over time that, somebody buys it and comes in and either asks to rezone it to multifamily, or it's already zoned for multifamily and there's one house there. And then they, develop around that or redevelop and don't keep the house. Again, slowly over time. So when we look at our land and how much land we have in the urban growth boundary for new development, single family, multifamily, et cetera, it's not just vacant parcels, it's larger parcels that only have, one house on them. That's partially vacant land. That's part of our land supply that we assume will redevelop in the future to more dense urban levels. Again, it's what Eunice was going back to talking about. The land inside the urban growth boundary is expected to develop to city densities at some point. The trade-off for that as Oregonians is that we get to protect our farm and forest land and have beautiful scenery right outside of our city. It's not developed with, strip malls and whatnot from here to the coast. That's the function of having an urban growth boundary. The flip side of that is that the land inside the urban growth boundary develops over time more densely as a trade-off for having that farm and forest land outside of the urban growth boundary. Hopefully that answers that. A strip club would not be permitted in the hub. Is that correct, Eunice? There's a question about a strip club in a hub.
No, we're proposing design standards again, so you couldn't have.
No, not a strip mall, a strip club. A strip club. Like a nightclub where people take off their clothes. Right? I believe that's Jason's question. No, so there's a very limited list of uses that would be permitted in the hub.
Right. And so if you've looked at that, I can put that, if you look at kind of our overview, that is a zone that, because we're creating it as a new zone, it's really an opportunity to shape it, both kind of the size of the development, the uses that the community wants to allow or not allow. So for example, when we did a survey on the neighborhood hub, we heard that people don't want to see offices. They don't want buildings just turned into, office space. And so we're not proposing to allow offices in neighborhood hubs. Again, that's on the input that we've already heard, but we're still getting input. So if there's a specific use you want to see allowed or you don't want to see allowed, please do let us know. We also heard in our outreach that we were allowing for like coffee shops and bookstores and yoga studios, but we weren't allowing necessarily for like social service agencies that maybe are needed in neighborhoods that are in closer walking distance to neighborhoods. We weren't, and nonprofit. And so we have added those to the list. So it's just a reminder that this is all a draft, right? None of this is final yet. And so we're taking all of this input to craft both what those zones look like, where those zones are applied. I saw another question that I was going to address. Maybe it had to do with the hubs. Let me just check. Why doesn't the UGB change? So the foundation really of this project in terms of the data that I keep talking about, our need for housing, our need for jobs, et cetera, are two studies called the Housing Needs Analysis and the Economic Opportunities Analysis. Those are two studies we did several years ago that looked at our future needs. And they're very much regulated in terms of how they're done by state law and state administrative rules. And those found that we don't need to change our urban growth boundary. We don't need to push out further, but we do need to change how our land can be used, which is why we're talking about rezoning land, for example. It takes a lot to justify an urban growth boundary. I mean, some cities spend millions of dollars, 10 years to try to expand. I think in some ways our urban growth boundary is actually fairly large, but again, it's just not designated. The land is not designated the right way to meet our needs. I don't know if Sherry, that was the question, but I thought I would just say that.
There was a question, I think, about the outreach and who's been involved to this point.
So we've done a lot of outreach over the years, going back to 2018, particularly during the visioning phase over the last year and a half, 2 years. We've worked with community groups, neighborhoods, businesses, communities of color, a lot of specific organizations, in addition to doing a lot of broad outreach at events. So we were at like Family Fest, we were at the farmers market, we're at all types of events as well. We've used media, we've been in the newspaper. I've just was interviewed again by both the Salem Reporter and the Statesman Journal. We've been in the West Side newspaper. We've been on social media. We've sent out flyers. We sent out postcards to every property owner that would be impacted by a zone change and business tenants. We've done a lot of outreach. That's not to say that we've reached every single person that lives, works, or recreates or spends time in Salem. I recognize that that is not something that we can achieve. And so what we're really trying to do through this process is make sure that we're hearing all of the perspectives, all the different perspectives, including different communities that aren't typically at the table. So talking to social service agencies, talking to organizations that represent people with disabilities, talking to the tribes, talking to the communities of color. This is all important perspectives that typically we don't necessarily hear. And so we've made a big push to hear from them. And obviously property owners, we've sent out mailers several times to property owners to say, hey, we are thinking about a proposed change that could impact your property. Please get in touch with us. I've gotten a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from property owners. And last year we held, We held property owner specific meetings that were tailored just to property owners, and we had invited them to attend. So while I recognize that we haven't heard from everyone, and maybe not everyone knows, I would ask that you help spread the word. This is really the time to have people give input. And if you have ideas for how we can do more outreach, I'm always open to ideas. We're constantly adding new outreach, ways of outreach. So that's my summary.
There was a question about kind of Airbnb that maybe I didn't answer before. I actually don't see it in here, but somebody is asking if they do an Airbnb now and the zoning is changed to multifamily, does that mean they have to stop? Pretty sure the answer is no, but I'm furiously scrolling through the code to find the answer before I give that. So okay. I will look for that and let you know.
Okay. The question about, is our Salem only for City of Salem within the UGB? No, we are coordinating with Polk and Marion counties for the unincorporated areas of those counties that are within our portion of the urban growth boundary. So those are ongoing conversations. So the zoning, we only control the zoning within the City of Salem. And so the zoning map, as you'll see, is only within city limits. So that didn't answer my question. I want to know the percentage of residents that have provided input to this program. So I wish I could tell you that I just know the percentage offhand. We have talked to hundreds, thousands of people. And again, that could include an in-depth conversation at a meeting or a one-on-one. That could just include talking to people as they stop at our booth at a farmer's market. That could be someone answering a survey question, right? So there's a lot of ways people have participated. I don't have a number for you. Trying to see if I missed anything else.
So there's questions about notice. So we did send a postcard to property owners that are proposed to be rezoned. There's questions from people that live near an area that's proposed to be rezoned. And we didn't send postcards to them, although when the project first started, we sent a citywide mailer. And then all the other outreach units is talking about. So maybe there's confusion there. We definitely did send a postcard to every property owner that's proposed to be rezoned.
Let's see.
I don't think, I apologize if it sounds that we're being defensive. I guess we can't guarantee that every person looks at every piece of mail that comes from the city and, you know, takes an in-depth look at it. You know, I know as somebody who gets a lot of mail, sometimes it doesn't seem like anything important and then maybe go through it too fast, but we did send the notice to those folks that are proposed to be rezoned. And they will get notice when the public hearings are going to come. If they're still on the map to, you know, to propose to be rezoned, they will get an official notice of the public hearing, how to provide input and testimony, time, date, all that kind of stuff. So it'll be more than a postcard at that point. There's something else. There was a comment about access, certain streets and the access for R4 from Cecilia. Then she commented she had to leave. So we'll look into that comment from Cecilia and the specific property she mentioned there on Stoneway.
And Austin I guess you can't drop in the chat. So we do have an interested parties email list where we send updates if there's a new meeting happening or a milestone in the project or a survey or things like that. And I will drop that into the chat. You can sign up directly, just put your email in it and you'll be added to that list automatically. Feel free to share that with neighbors and others that maybe couldn't attend today. Or you can just go on cityofsalem.net and it's on the website as well. Austin, can you actually go on? I forgot that there's more to the presentation and then we'll circle back to questions. So we're continuing to do outreach. We will then make revisions to the map and present that to the community before we go through the adoption process, which I think I've already covered. The map is just one portion of the project. As I kind of mentioned earlier, we're doing a lot of other work on policies. So those are that's what actually would go into the comprehensive plan, updated goals and policies. We've been having weekly meetings every Wednesday since the end of March. We have a survey online that's in English and in Spanish. If you're interested in kind of ideas, what are the ideas that we should be adopting as a community to help inform how we grow and how we spend our money and what decisions we make. That information is all online. We do plan to have the interactive map open until June 11th, at which point we will close it to comments. That's not to say you can't email me, call me, talk to your neighborhood association, have a meeting, etc. But at some point we want to close the comments so we can look at all of them and start thinking about revisions to the map. In addition to that, one of the other things that are happening at the detail level is the zoning subcommittee. So that's a committee of 4 planning commissioners and 4 city councilors that are looking at 6 specific potential changes to the zoning code. So not the map, but the code to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from transportation. So they're really focusing on how to promote more housing and mixed use, for example, near our transit service, our transit routes. So those meetings are open to the public. The next one is next week on May 27th. They're open to comments. So if you want to submit comments, we'll pass those on to the committee. If you want to sign up in advance, you can register to provide comment at those meetings as well. So all that information is online. And that's just my contact information. Feel free to share it. I know it's been shared quite a bit, but if you want to call me or email me, please do so. And that's just the project website. We're constantly adding information to the website, so please feel free to check back on it. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say I clarified on the short-term rental of the Airbnb. So if you have a house today and you're doing one and the property is rezoned to multifamily, you can continue to do one in your house. So hopefully that clarifies that question. If you have any questions, we do have a FAQ page for short-term rentals on our website at citysalem.net, or you can feel free to send me an email. My email's not up there, but it's lmanderson@citysalem.net. And then Suzanne has asked, I think one question we didn't get to, if a property owner must sign off on the rezone. So I think Eunice answered that, or if it can be rezoned if they don't respond to us. The answer is yes, it can. So it's legislative. So we're required to send notice. We're not required to receive any comment back in order for the council to take action. So hopefully that answers that. And there's a question about if safety is a consideration in a zone change. Lori, I'm wondering maybe if you mean street safety for pedestrians, cars, etc. That's maybe the question. Eunice? Do you have an answer on safety, if safety is a consideration?
Yeah, so as we kind of talked about citing of different types of uses, we are looking at, as it relates to transportation, how people can get there. So we're looking at bike lanes, sidewalks, bus routes. Oh, you're talking criminal activity. We've not looked at criminal activity in terms of where we're citing things. Can you clarify that? So that if there's high criminal activity, there shouldn't be a certain type of development allowed?
Yeah, I think we would just say that, Salem PD is very responsive to neighborhood concerns. And so they send officers, for example, to the neighborhood associations to hear those concerns about any criminal activity. And then they bring information on how, residents can stay safe with lighting, how to report crime, etc. And so that's what we would expect to continue to happen. A clarification, there's only a few police on patrol in West Salem. So number of police is not necessarily a consideration for where development should happen. Just a reminder, we're not comparing potential multifamily to no development, right? All land has a development potential. And so we're comparing maybe changing it to multifamily instead of single family. So an area that might be vacant today it's not a choice between it staying vacant forever necessarily. And I'm trying to see what the other comment is. Slide issues on land to be multifamily. Yes, most of the vacant land left in Salem is not flat. We do have a landslide ordinance. So for any kind of development that's going to happen on land that's subject to landslide hazards, there's development requirements as far as geotechnical reports and assessments that have to be done by geotechnical engineers to determine if it's safe to be built on and how to build on it safely. So those regulations apply to all development today and we continue to apply. And if there's anything else?
Concerns about traffic, which I think Julie did talk about the bridge and congestion. And there's still the hand raise. Is that an old hand raise? The Galaxy.
Yeah, I think, yeah, he had it raised before he spoke.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So before we wrap up, Julie or Patricia or Austin, is there anything you wanted to add or anything that I missed that you want me to talk to or you want to bring up? No?
Nope. Oh,
Nope.
Julie. Oh, Julie's there. Yes.
I'll just say that the whole R Salem, so not specifically related to zoning, but on the policy front. The intention is that once the R Salem policies are adopted, we will then be looking at changes to the Salem Transportation System Plan to see what changes are needed to implement the policies. And I think that's the same as with the Comprehensive Park System Master Plan. So the R Salem policies are sort of that overarching vision umbrella, and then we have individual master plans for
You cut out there at the end, but I think the takeaway is that the Transportation System Plan and the Comprehensive Parks Master Plan will be updated after the R Salem project. And Patricia's face reminds me that we are also collaborating very closely with her and all the climate action plan work that is happening. That's another huge project that's going on, looking at how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote resiliency. And so there's ways to give input on that project as well. So obviously, land use and transportation are tied into both our Salem and the climate action plan. So we are closely collaborating on both projects. Did I miss anything, Patricia? Okay.
Stole her thunder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I just wanted to thank you all for coming out. This meeting is recorded, so it will be online. And we will be saving the chat as well and making that available online. So if you have any other questions or comments, feel free to email me or call me. And thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.